Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the Seeing Ability Podcast, where we're having a conversation about the world of people with disabilities, which means we're going to be talking to adults who have grown up with disabilities, in some cases, parents who have raised kids with issues, and a lot of different people that support that community. Some cases, that's going to be folks working in healthcare, working in nonprofits, or in education. So, first of all, I know you've got a lot of choices when it comes to what you listen to. So I want to thank you for tuning in today and being with us. I think you're going to have a great time, especially because of my guest. Cindy, thank you so much for being up with us today.
It's so good to be here. Seriously, when you asked me to do this, I was like, "Oh, yay!" Because this is such um, it's such a part of my life to talk about this, and not there's not too many people out there that you could talk about. Having raising a child with special needs. I mean, it's only 2%
Absolutely. And I
population.
and I
Yeah,
think that's one of the things our audience loves about this podcast is when people are speaking, everybody's nodding their head because we all kind of get each other. So I think you guys are going to love it because Cindy is not only a mom, she's an author, she's kind of an advocate, she's got a lot of different angles. So as my listeners know, we always, even though we're all talking about this world of disabilities, we're all just people. So I always like to ask a couple quick questions so they can get to know you as a person. I call it the fast four. So, and I prepped Cindy for this. Our fast four is brought to you by my friends at Reliable Tech Help. It's an IT company that can help you with your tech needs. So don't forget, if you have tech needs, call Reliable Tech Help at 502-797-7399. Here's the fast four. Number one, favorite food.
shrimp. However, I'm allergic to shellfish now.
There you go. Oh, that's a dilemma. Number two, if we saw your playlist, what's a music that would be on it? What's a band you like?
Bob Marley. I think Bob Marley got me through some really hard times. And there's a song out there. It's Don't Worry. It's Three Little Birds. And that's the song that had always got me through tough times. And it's still become like my music.
Bob Marley, don't worry. I love it. Okay, what about a book you're reading or a guilty pleasure TV show you watch but you don't admit to everybody?
I have too many, so I couldn't even go. But right now I'm on Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It just came out. The first portion of it's a little cheesy, but then after that it evolves, and every episode it's different characters and incredibly well written. So it takes you away. Escapism.
Well, anything is a good answer. This is a no judgment zone when it comes to guilty pleasures. Okay, and last but not least, if you got surprised and you're going to be whisked away today to a favorite vacation type destination anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Italy, hands down, every place you go in that country, it's just easy peasy.
There you go. So we're all kind of thinking about a trip to Italy right now. I love it. Okay, so for all parents in this world, the journey starts out with acceptance, kind of the idea that your path raising a kid who's medically involved or has some kind of disability is going to be a little different than maybe you imagined when you first found out you were pregnant and expecting that child. Tell us a little bit about your journey with kind of acceptance and folks haven't met you, so we need a little of your backstory of how you got into this world and kind of what it taught you and maybe advice you'd have for other parents who are maybe newer in the journey, just dealing with some type of diagnosis.
I think if I look back, so I was in my 20s, and when Brian was diagnosed, my son, who is now 31, he was born with a rare brain tumor and really the only surviving adult right now with this. And so I didn't know where this was going to go. However, I'm a Reiki practitioner. So I do have a little bit of this intuitive feeling, I guess you could say. And Brian was a perfectly healthy baby. He was giant. He was 12 pounds when he was born. And I just felt he was just such a good kid. I just had this intuition that there was something behind his eye. And how do you present something to a doctor where you're like, hey, I have this intuition? I mean, they kind of dismissed me, and I would too. To be honest, I would have just thought, oh, she's wackadoodle. But I kept on going back to the doctor and insisting. I think eventually they just got tired of me insisting on this whim,
Right.
and I got referred to a specialist, and the specialist said that he saw a shadow behind in the back of his eye. And then he suggested an MRI. And when I got my MRI, um, they found, not I, but him, Brian, when he got his MRI, they found, well, it was like a size of a plum, I guess you could say, behind his eye.
Oh,
And
goodness.
so it was a brain tumor. And I saw the people running into the room and looking at the screen. So I knew, for me, it was like a relief. I had already grieved through this process. I remember feeling it so intensely and I broke down in tears. So I felt like I had done the grieving and the shock of it, but then it was another wave of, where am I going to go from here? Like, what does this look like? Will, first of all, will he survive? I think that was kind of it. And
Sure.
then after that is like, what is this unknown world? Like, is it going to be fixed and we're going to just go on? Like we're going to celebrate everything and live life like how it was before. And I knew in my heart it wasn't, but I wanted it to be that way. And I think that
Mm.
was the unfolding of having somebody with special needs. Or is it neurodivergent now? So that's what I just heard. So I just got corrected on that. And I told my son, I said, hey, Brian, do you know that you're neurodivergent? That is the politically correct term. And he was like, no, I'm not that. I'm special needs because I'm special. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's just go with special needs. So for those out there, forgive me. I'm just going with the words that my son would like me to say.
I love that. Yeah, we have no judgment on labels here. I think it's like we can say that you had a child that was on a non-traditional path, I guess, from early on. You mentioned the doctors and how you kind of had to advocate to be heard. That's a part of the journey for every parent, I think, especially a lot of parents. The more medically involved your kid is, there's doctors, there's surgeries, there's procedures, and that can be pretty overwhelming. Most parents I talk to kind of go through a process to kind of find their voice and their footing. What was that like for you? And what advice would you give to other parents on how they can kind of relate to and find a healthy relationship with their providers?
Um, so I really struggled with this. Again, I was incredibly young having Brian. I was in my 20s, middle 20s. And so I didn't really have an established voice at that time.
Mhm.
So I just, if a doctor told me, I did ask him, what advice would you give me to navigate through this? And he told me I need a village. And he said, where is your village? And it was just me in the room. And I thought, oh, okay, I don't have my husband here. I don't have any family members, or I don't have a friend. I just didn't think about that. I was just heard this horrific news. I'm going in there. That's what I was accustomed to. When you go to the doctor, you just go to the doctor and it's one person. You don't bring a team in. So I wasn't even thinking about that. So that was right there. That was an eye opener. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know what this looks like. And should I be afraid? Is this something I really need to prepare for? So I just was kind of like lost, bam, like I just didn't know what this new world was going to go through. And I really had, and it wasn't being naive. I think it was just, I really thought that he would have his surgery and we would just go on with life because I wanted to hold on to that. I don't think we have children and we have already a belief, like a secret belief that there's something going to tragically be something that's tragically going to happen to them. I don't think we are innately we just don't innately think that. We were always very positive. We're going to get married, we're going to have children. We always picture everything perfect because why would we go to the next? I mean, that would just be just horrific if we thought that way. So with that mindset, I just wanted to believe that life would continue. And so finding my voice in this process, um, I started to realize um, that I had opinions. That was a big thing. And I started to recognize that they're people too, that doctors come in with their lifestyle. Maybe they had a fight with their significant other, maybe they just had a bad day. And I recognized that this is a job for them and they're people too. And when I recognized that, I thought, well, okay, this is a working relationship. There is no pecking order here. I'm also the person who is coming to get a service. And when I started thinking about that, that's kind of when I found my voice. And in that, I recognized that, especially in a hospital setting, they give you a doctor, but then I realized that I didn't really resonate with that doctor. So I would say, do you have somebody else in your practice
Mm.
that, who is more suited for my personality? And they would, of course, be offended. But you know what? I could recognize that this was a long haul and I needed to find somebody who really resonated with me. And then when I started picking my team, I know they have their team, but when I started picking my team, my A-list team, I think it was interesting. I did get some kickback, but they actually, all those doctors in there, they were all similar, and they called themselves the A-list team because there was a large team that helped with Brian. And so I think that's something that you have to recognize, that you are the consumer, and
Mm.
it's a give and take in there. And it was hard to find my voice. I did struggle, but I think you do recognize it. Mhm.
Yeah, that's so powerful. The idea that you're the captain of the ship, and when you go in, you kind of think like you're sort of deferring to everybody else. But when you get that power, you realize, like you said, it's going to be a long-term thing. Why would you settle for anything that doesn't feel right? But I think initially a lot of people don't think they have the option of doing that. You had to kind of discover that.
Right. And it was interesting because years later on, I started to recognize that through kind of like self-awareness, finding self-empowerment, I recognized that I felt more, mm, not, because the scenarios are so uncontrolled. You never know it's an uncontrollable scenario. You never know where it's going to go the next day. That at least I felt that I was doing everything to advocate for myself and my son. And,
Mhm.
that I was his voice. And if he was an adult, would he agree with these decisions? And I really tried to keep that in mind. Like if he came back years later and said, Mom, what were you thinking and why did you do that? I kept on thinking, like, how do I be his voice? How do I think, you know, I think, how do I be the best advocate for him? And if I had to sit in front of him, that I would have no regrets, that I was fighting just as equally as he would fight for his life.
I love that. I love that. You mentioned that your one doctor talked about a village, and that's kind of a part of the journey for families, is like getting that support system, that broader village, even accessing different services that are out there, things that are options. I think when you start, you don't know what you don't know. Talk to us a little bit about how you went about finding those solutions, and kind of what you learned from it, and then maybe what you'd recommend to others in terms of that part of the journey.
So finding your village, you know, you may not find your village. I found that not all people who had a child with special needs were really thinking the same way as I was. I found
Mhm.
that a lot of support groups, that other families were just, deteriorating, I guess you could say, and they were dealing with their own emotional grief. I think there's different techniques, there's different grief processes, so not everybody is in the same spot. So I found my support, where they have sometimes in like actually my favorite one was my social worker. I've never had a social worker. I never knew what they were doing, but I didn't seem to get a lot of input from other people. I didn't get to take on their grief. I was really kind of just advocating for myself. So I was able to recognize that really, really quickly, like, okay, I can't take on anybody's emotional grief. I have to just take on mine and just run with it, because I didn't have a village. My husband was absent. And honestly, family, as much as I love, 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 and adore them, they didn't understand the levels of grief that I was going through. And
Mhm.
they couldn't, I wouldn't even want that for them. So they just couldn't understand it. So they were not my greatest support. So I really kind of relied on a social worker or somebody who was in the hospital setting, that really could provide quick and immediate advice. And that's where I went. And I know everybody's different, but that's what worked for me.
Sure. And I remember when we talked before this episode, you got really good at finding solutions for yourself. Tell us a little bit about that. And you know, kind of a problem solver.
Um, okay. So what part are you referring to?
I mean, in terms of like, I know eventually you got asked to do this for other families because you were finding ways to like navigate the system and find solutions. And you did it so well that somebody said, "Hey, would you kind of be doing this for a job?"
Right. Which is just even the thought of it was crazy. So I was a court stenographer at the very beginning, and that's what I did for a living. And then I had children, and this changed my life. And so um well, things fell apart. I ended up getting a divorce. That was one of the, I guess it's 92% people who have a child with special needs ends up getting a divorce. And I remember hearing that statistic. It frightened me. So I immediately went into support groups and I found a counselor. But it did happen. And through this process, since I was, well, my medical bills were just horrific. So I think Brian's first surgery was $1 million. And so he is 31 now. And if you think way back, just even 30 years ago, $1 million back then, that's like twice the amount. And I'm sure I'm completely exaggerating, but I don't know what that's really like. But it was horrific. And if you take 20% of that medical bill of $1 million and you have to pay that back,
Sure.
and then all the other medical bills, I actually ended up becoming completely indigent and homeless and being a single mom and really relying on the system. So I found it frustrating that there's for the average person, which I always call the working poor, that we had, like, I had these horrific medical bills. And for once I became indigent, then I got all the services that one could have possibly imagine. And I thought, okay, that's not the perfect system, but that was the system I was working with at that time. So through this process, I went on welfare, and in this system of welfare, I recognized that were some loopholes. And like I would find that there were diapers in one place, or what else? I remember milk, food, anything that I could get resources that would bring my costs down, my living costs down, that I actually the hospital would call me up, or maybe another social worker would call me up and go, "Hey, Cindy, where are you getting these things?" I'm like, "Oh, call St. James right now. They're having, a delivery of diapers. They just got a donation." Or the hospital would, or a social worker would call me and say, "Okay, where can I get this?" And I would say, "Oh, call blah, blah, blah." So anyway, it ended up being that through the public health department, they heard that I was doing this. And they said, "If you ever get through your crisis, we have a job for you." And I said, "Oh, I will never be done with this crisis. This is a full-time job, trying to navigate through my bills and trying to find resources so that I could survive and my child to boot." And I ended up getting a job, and it was a resource coordinator for children with special needs through the public health department. And since my parents were now immigrants, I actually chose to take the hardest demographic because I felt they were an underserved population. So I drove 45 minutes every day, and I was able to work part-time in clinic and then also at home. So I did a lot of my charting at home, and it was an additional income. So I mean, it served me, but it was an incredible process. I was the first contact person who had a child with any kind of medical disability or just a disability. And I was the first person. And then I was able to provide all the resources for that person because I went through this. My life was this every single day. And I
Right.
loopholes in the system. So this was just sort of natural. It just was just commonplace. I was just talking about everything, that happened years before or years later, but that's what I kind of School of Hard Knocks, let's just say that. And through this, I got to follow families maybe 6, 7 years. And I found it interesting through this process that I would say, what are you getting out of it? Because I would just come over and there was only so many amount of services I could get. And they're like, well, we love the services. We love, thank you. But it's really your storytelling. It's really your storytelling of hope that you found a way through, or you are going through it, and hearing these stories that I could go through it, and then they would want to hear updates about my son and what is he doing and how did I feel about that. And I think in some ways it was just bringing hope. That's what I felt like. It was seeds of hope that they too can carry on, that there is a brighter future, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I recognize that that's what I gravitated to. Even in my
Mm.
providers, I gravitated towards providers who had a very optimistic point of view. And I remember um, one doctor, I said to him, "Hey, do you think Brian's going to survive?" And he said, "Absolutely, he will survive. He's going to go, to high school. He's going to possibly drive a car, And I remember thinking, okay, this guy is going to be on my team because right now they're telling me that he should be institutionalized and he's too much care and we don't think he'll survive. So I just thought, I want that mindset. And I think when I heard the parents that I was working with, they wanted that too. They just wanted to have belief that they're going to carry on and that they're going to be okay. And I think that's hope. When I look at it, it's hope.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I mean, how lucky you were. And I love how you said they need to be part of my team to find the doctor that was, of course, he's going to do fine. And that inspiration and that hope that had to mean so much to you to find him along the journey. And then the idea of the challenges you faced, not only learning how to fight for your family and follow through with those for yourself, but then turning around and empowering others. That had to be probably something you never imagined that was possible, but it had to be so rewarding.
Yeah, actually, just to think about that scared 20-year-old. And then here I was in my 30s, and it was just mind blowing. I was a completely different person, completely changed. Um, yeah, a lot of tears, a lot of grief, a lot of pain. But when I looked at that, it was kind of like a proud moment. I think I kind of stepped into something that I didn't know that I even had. I didn't even know that I had a voice. I didn't know that I was actually a powerful voice, and that I was a great parent. And I didn't really think that I had any of those qualities because it was all new and emerging. And when I thought, this is, if I could look at Brian as an adult, I hope he can make it as an adult. But if I could look at him, I would say, honey, I did everything I could do for you at all costs and at all expense. I was there. I was your voice. I was right there for you. But that you have to have balance in that. And I think later on in life, I recognize, yes, I have another child. Yes, all these other things. And I think that's when I started to put those pieces into play, that it's a balance and this is a journey and this goes on for life. And how do I maintain something for myself, something for my child? I still have to work. And how do I keep all these balls in the air and still be my best for everybody else? And that was a completely different journey. And I think a lot of parents could recognize, like, oh, okay, well, I've just put out these fires, but this is long term. How do we do this as, in the long play?
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a lot about, stories of hope and that partially what this podcast is all about, right? Hearing parents like you, and that helps them be ready to fight another battle. You probably had a lot of parents who at certain times there's kind of that balance between being hopeful and giving in to like worry and anxiety and tough days. What is your advice then, or what's your advice now for parents to navigate those ups and downs of your emotional journey as you're fighting these fights?
Don't suppress them. I think I would go with everything that you're feeling. You know, I remember there were times that I would cry so much I would just slip onto the kitchen floor and think like, what am I doing? Like, can I get off this floor? And then other times where I was just very, very optimistic. And I never really, I didn't really try to go with it too long. I almost kind of like stopped myself after a while, but I always went with the emotion. So I didn't want to be completely indulgent in it, but I wanted to at least grieve or feel the win. I think feeling the wins was a big thing, and giving gratitude for every win and for every day, because I didn't even know if Brian was he would have 63 seizures a day, and a lot of times I would have to resuscitate him. So I didn't know if I was going to have him one moment or 2 hours later, and I would always give gratitude. And I think gratitude, giving gratitude for everything that you have in life, is truly a vital step, because you have to celebrate your wins. And if it's just a warm cup of coffee that day and everything else was just garbage, celebrate that moment. Like, I had a beautiful cup of coffee and 2 minutes to myself. And that sounds absolutely ridiculous now, but at that time it was my win, and I would celebrate my win.
Yeah, it's amazing the how grounding gratitude can be, right? When you
Mhm.
anchor yourself in gratitude, it gives you a different perspective to see the world. I love that. You mentioned the rest of the family, and you said I had another child. That can be an issue sometimes for parents to navigate. Is life can inherently revolve around the doctor's appointments and the therapies, and that kid with special needs. I know
Mhm.
we talked before this episode. You were sharing about your journey and like sibling camp and things like that. Talk to us about that balancing with the rest of the family, especially other kids.
So being a single mom, it was just myself and my daughter and my son, and I started to recognize behaviors in my daughter, real neediness, temper tantrums, and then I was reading like these are all forms. Oh, she would have anxiety, just random anxiety, and I thought, oh, I recognized. I was told by my social worker that this is a sign of depression. A depression looks completely different in a child versus an adult, like a young child. And so I was like, oh, so she's depressed. And it was kind of, I mean, I'm sorry, but it was a wake up call for me, kind of like, oh, this is not just about Brian. This is not just about me. Um, that I have another human being to take care of, and what's the long-term play in this? So, I started looking for services for her, and I recognized too that, I had to put her Brian was long-term, and I had to put her first. And in doing that and creating a healthy mindset for my child, I recognize that was probably like, even though it felt like it should be the reverse, that I had to put her first and myself, and then Brian, because Brian was ongoing, and still to this day, I worry about him. There's always a headspace for him that I have concerns. And when I look back and I listen to my daughter to this day, and she's like, "Mom, I always felt like you were looking after me, and I can't even," she's pregnant now, "I can't even imagine you taking time like the way you did." And I have to say, it was a hard, hard thing to stop, but the fact that she says that now and that she feels that, it's I don't even know how to explain that, to the fact that it's so I feel like she feels and recognizes the challenges that I had, and she feels so loved that no matter what was going on, I would come over there and maybe go to her play. Because when you're having 63 seizures a day and you're nursing, how do you do this? But I somehow just made it happen, and the fact that she has so much admiration right now for the fact that I took time, and I never talked to her about this, but now that she's expecting, she's like, "Mom, I recognize this now, and so thank you." Wow, that's probably, maybe the greatest compliment I could get.
Absolutely. There's so many moments as parents when we doubt ourselves. That had to be a moment that felt just straight to your heart.
Yeah, and, to hear it 30 years later, I mean, you just do the work. But I did put her in SIP camps, and it was through Children's Hospital. And there they would have a celebration for the sibling of a special needs um, sibling.
Yeah.
Um, so there she was able, I remember they would chant like, I am special too. And I thought, of course you are. And so, but she didn't feel that way. And a lot of times she would go to bed crying and say, Mom, you don't love me. You love Brian more. And that really pulled on my heartstrings. So that was something that I really tried to focus on. Like, of course, you matter just as much. Brian just has a little bit more needs right now, but you are always at the forethought of my heart and my mind. And this is something you're going to have to learn a little bit sooner in life. And I hate the fact that you have to do this, but there's a, there's, if someone's bleeding or they cut their knee, then I have to put a Band-Aid on it, Hannah, and then I will come back to you. And so that is something that she got rushed into learning a little bit sooner, but I mean, we all learned that later
Yeah.
on. Mm.
When you enter this different path, a natural thing can be to think of the things you're going to lose, the things that are going to be taken away. I'd love to ask you, what are the things that this journey has brought into your life that were it not for this, were it not for that tumor that was discovered, you wouldn't have ever had these experiences? How has it shaped who you are today?
I'm a completely different person, and I'm better for it. I never would have believed this. Um, One time I remember Brian was a teenager and I said, Brian, you're an absolute gift. And he was mad that I said that. He goes, this is not a gift. This is a curse. Mom, like, why would you even say that? And so I didn't share anymore, but I kept on looking at him, and I still believe he is my gift. He opened up my eyes. My world is different. I see things differently. I relate to people differently. I feel completely changed inside and outside because of him. I think every day I look at life as a gift, and I recognize that we're not always given tomorrow. I find that I talk to people and really want to listen to them because it's
Mm.
such a special moment. And I guess more grateful, just more grateful for the gift of life and just to be part of this incredible world. But I've really become a different person. And I don't think I was that person. I think I was a lot more self-centered and selfish, coming into, at the very beginning to what I am now. I'm a very different person. And I also feel I am found my voice, and well, I'm just not that shy kid anymore.
That's amazing. So, obviously, Brian, in the beginning, you didn't even know if he was going to survive.
Right.
Today, I get the sense you're just a little proud of him. It's going to be tough to talk about, but why don't you tell us a little bit about him in his 30s? What's he up to these days? What is he doing now that you one day couldn't even dream that he would be doing?
So Brian was born with a rare brain tumor, and when they removed the tumor out, he lost his ability to speak and walk, and he had definitely cognitive delays, and also a lot of the medication he was on for seizure control. And now, after over 100 surgeries, quit counting after 100, and he is able to talk, walk. He ended up going through Votech, and he's in IT. He does have some challenges typing, and so like a lot of the verbal portion of that, because since his emotional center had been removed, and then also his speech center had been removed. Those things have made their own neural pathways back, but now he struggles at that. So he's very matter of fact, but because of that, he is excellent at what he does for a job. It's just sort of matter of fact. It's bug finding. He's able to do that, and I think. I share with him. I said, that is a gift because not everybody can do that. And I think it's interesting that because of his speech center being removed, he has really heightened sensor, like a sensory, I think, or senses. He's very intuitive about people, and it's something that I don't possess. Like he's completely off the charts, and he just knows certain things about people. And I think when one
Hmm.
sensory or some of your senses are gone, they excel and they're heightened. So I think those are, I mean, I always tell him, I said, that's a gift. Like not everybody has that. So about Brian, what do I love about Brian? Everything. He's a better chef than he has 4 siblings. He's a better chef than his sisters. He's tenacious more than anybody I've ever met. He's my hero. He always teaches me about resilience and celebrating the win, because he does celebrate his win. And I think, what else? He teaches me resilience, celebrating the win. Um, being more compassionate, slowing down, things, never taking things for granted. He is amazing, like really remarkable person. Yeah,
Well, yeah. And the fact that he's with us here today is amazing. So
that right there. Yes.
I,
'Cause
I feel like we could talk, and I'm sure people would want to listen to us for hours, but I think we are just about out of time. So I want to say thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. It was an honor to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really great.
And for our listeners, we would love your help. If you were moved by today's episode, we could use your help. Go to seeingability.com. We'd love you to like our Facebook page, follow the page, and then most importantly, share this episode with other people. If you know moms, dads, providers, people in this world who really would love to hear stories like this, we would love them to know about this podcast. So please go to seeingability.com and spread the word. We also want to thank the Bauer Foundation, which is involved in underwriting this podcast. And thank you for taking your time to listen. Cindy, thanks for being here today.
Excellent. So good. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.